Good evening, everyone. The time is 7:01 PM on Monday, April 8th, 2024. I'd like to call this Heritage Advisory Committee meeting to order. The town of Aurora acknowledges that the Anishinaabe lands on which we live and work are the traditional and treaty territories of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, as well as many other nations whose presence here continues to this day. As the closest First Nations community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and as a municipality, we join them in these responsibilities. We further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas and Chippewas recognized through Treaty Number 13, as well as the Williams Treaty of 1923. A shared understanding of how rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. May I please have a motion to approve the revised agenda as circulated by Legislative Services? John? Bob? Do you want to make a?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I wonder if we could move matter for consideration 7.3 to the front of the agenda, just because I think it will be the shortest item before us, and we do have the owner here.
Okay. Everyone okay with that? All right, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, could I please have a motion to receive the meeting minutes of March 18th, 2024? Bob? Cynthia? Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Delegations, we have one, Christopher Watts, the Aurora Heritage Authority, re-proposal for heritage enhancements to 9 Wellington Street East, Knowles Butcher Shop. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks. And just because you have a more fulsome agenda, and I understand this owner has family to get back to, I'm also a little counsel if you'd like to push my presentation for later in the meeting. And that way have more room for your business. And I'm happy to stay anytime meeting if that's something that's committee.
Are you okay with that? Okay. So we'll put that on pause. So 7.3. May I have a mover and seconder to put the item on the floor for discussion, please? Bob? Cynthia? So this is regarding memorandum from Manager of Policy Planning and Heritage Permit Application HPA 2024-04 40 Spruce Street. Adam, do you want to
Sure. Yes.
start us off?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So this is a heritage permit application for a property that's located within our Northeast Old Aurora Heritage Conservation District and designated under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Proposed work is for the replacement of 3 doors that are street facing, as well as a 4th rear door. But the primary focus is these 3 street facing doors, as shown in the attachment number 1. This work does qualify for delegated approval, but is being presented to the Heritage Committee for any comments in their review prior to them proceeding with staff delegated approval. And as mentioned, the owner is also here as well to provide any further information as required.
Thank you. Any comments or questions?
I have no issues.
Okay. So the recommendation is that the memorandum regarding heritage permit application HPA 2024-02 40 Spruce be received, and that the Heritage Advisory Committee comments regarding heritage permit application HPA 2024-02 40 Spruce Street be received and referred to staff for consideration and further action as appropriate. Any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Christopher, do you want to do yours now or after Petch House? Could be a lengthy discussion. I don't know.
That's fine. I can say
Yeah. Okay. So 7.1. CMS 24-005 Patch House considerations. The first item is the report that was on council on February 27th, 2024. Robin, do you want to speak to this?
For the report.
Sorry, I'm just gonna get
Yes.
a mover in a second there. Bob, Cynthia, go ahead.
Okay, so the report has been shared with the committee addition for information. It's more than memorandum that's meet that in 6.2 item, which we're bringing before the Heritage Advisory Committee. As you'll note, this subject has been brought to the Heritage Advisory Committee twice before. It took a bit to get to council, but in doing so, out of respect for the previous advisory committee's comments, we took the comments from that committee, which I believe 3 of today's committee members are the same as the 3 out of the 6 from the previous round. We, out of respect for those comments, we took them to council, but taking information to council, they've asked us to come back to this committee. Obviously, we've got new members here. And basically revisiting the feedback, just in case you have anything new to say and wish to add. But ultimately, this was a request for council to consider the Petch House. As we all know, it was moved to site many years ago. Basic renovation at the time, just to put it on a concrete pad, and some basic restorations were performed and when it was moved. Since that time, it has sat vacant. The odd time it's engaged for purposes of an event. I know Shelley has used it for her Easter egg, Easter hunt. And I know we've used it a little bit as storage, but beyond that, it hasn't been used for anything. So council had asked for consideration for what would be needed if it could be used and turned into a wedding chapel. Subsequently, that came to this committee for consideration and feedback. There were concerns and possibly about heritage preservation and what kind of renovations would be involved. And I brought our manager of facilities with us who can speak to those renovations we're speaking about, and as well Ivy, who obviously performs our wedding ceremonies. And just to speak to the demand and interest in the Petch House for such a site. Thanks to Adam and the Heritage Group as well, that they definitely have provided the feedback and awareness as to preservation and what could be done in the facility. And subsequently, what we have brought before council and now back to here are basically 2 versions. One is a wedding chapel, very basic renovations, make it accessible, add electrical to it so that we could have lights in there. We would just add a security system to it, and ultimately keeping it pretty minimalist. It would only be a seasonal use. So in other words, one that's fair weathered from basically April through to October possibly is when it would get used. The challenge being if we went more extensive, in order to make it more viable year round, we would obviously have to add HVAC. We would have to add washrooms to make it a more daily occurrence or use for longer periods of time, where the weddings uses are 30 minutes max, so in and out. They can use the town hall for washroom needs. So what we brought before you today is the wedding chapel scenario of what we feel are recommendations. The demand certainly is what we're trying to accommodate the interest. Right now, wedding, where do I have to point this thing? Can you see? Probably you're not pointing the right one. Is it on? Oh, is it on? Well, that's a good question.
Just throw that.
That would be a good scenario. On. Thanks, everybody. My IT score? No, your IT too. Now, which way do I still aim it? This way. So obviously our beloved Petch House, but inside, I'm sharing some photos. Some of this might look familiar to some of you because they were brought before you previously. But this again is just the basic provision improvements we're speaking about. The minimalist to make it useful for wedding services seasonally. So what we feel needs to happen to provide that service is from an accessibility perspective, we obviously have a drop in threshold. You have to step up and over and down into the floor. So we need a ramp not only on as an exit on the top left image, showing right now you're stepping down a couple steps onto the grass. What we would be needing to do is to extend the stone walkway to create a grade as a secondary exit of the building that's accessible. Inside, you can see with a temporary platform we've put in that building as a temporary use that creates a ramp, but from that, you can see that there is quite a drop. And so what we're proposing to do alternatively is to actually put in a flooring system through the whole space. So it's all one level, and it would be even with the floor threshold at the doorway. And we'll get into the materials that we're speaking about in a later slide. Some electrical and security considerations. We have noted and observed when we recent inspection, although we have some panels, they're not hooked up yet. So we would obviously have to run electrical from the senior center over to provide that provision. We obviously want to create a bit of lighting inside, rope lighting or spotlights, just to give it a bit of an ambiance in case there's a later afternoon or a gray day that we can provide that service. Obviously, to help benefit the services for families and so on is to extend the Wi-Fi connectivity into this space. And then install a simple intrusion alarm system. Right now, there is not a security system on the building. We all know that there had been vandalism done in the last number of years. We'd like to protect it a little better, and this is the perfect time to add that provision to this facility. And then as mentioned, the flooring system, as you can see, again, there's a step down into the building. What we want to do is raise that level with the door threshold. So with our staff's recommendations, we would be using a plywood flooring to level it. And then use, if we can, find reclaimed flooring, rustic old floor over plywood to keep it that heritage theme. If we can't find the reclaimed plywood or reclaimed wood, the flooring system, we would use other alternatives like laminate flooring. That's not our first choice, obviously, but maybe with a wood looking theme to it. And then just other basic cosmetic and decor. We've mentioned the possibility, well, we know there are 2 additional windows still showing cracks and breaks that we need to repair. They're in the upper roof gable area. We need to finish the trim around some of the windows to hide some of that spray foam insulation, general cleanup, window cleaning, etc. And then some wedding decor, just to give it that wedding ambiance. So with this, we've estimated about a $50,000 cost that we are proposing to council to use the Heritage Reserve, which we have funds left in the reserve to do though. Our finance committee, our finance treasurer has recommended that source. If we went to that fuller gamut, just so that you're aware, that fuller gamut of adding HVAC, make it year round, improving and adding washrooms to make it more useful, we're now talking closer to 250,000. And yet the space shrinks. You're adding 2 washrooms into that space, it really becomes a lot more restrictive. So as a first step and a first phase, we felt this was a good step and wanted to recommend this version to council. Ultimately, we felt that any of these improvements we're making could go to a future phase if down the road it proves we wish to expand and increase the use down the way. So I'll leave it at that. Any other questions? And obviously I have our facility person here in Ivy if you have specific questions about the services provided. Yeah.
So we'll put both reports on and we'll have a little informal.
For you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Couple of questions. What is the frequency you anticipate for the number of services that it might accommodate in a given year?
I may, John.
So currently, the wedding program sees up to approximately on a higher end, 50 weddings a year.
50, so 1 a week.
Yeah. Well, we do additional weddings in the same day. But currently, we only use council chambers. During the pandemic, we were using the Skylight Gallery and it was really successful with the pandemic program. So because we're still seeing changes in the wedding industry, because we're coming out of COVID, people are making different choices for whatever reason to do a civil ceremony versus a traditional ceremony. Life is expensive, right? People are choosing smaller weddings over the larger weddings. So I would anticipate with both locations, we would ballpark it at probably 45 to 50 a year. But that's both locations, Petch House and the council chamber.
That's both within
Yeah.
the town
Yeah.
hall and, okay.
Yeah.
And the second question I had was, when all this capital cost is in place and it's paid for, what do you anticipate the running costs to be for heating and lighting and,
So to my knowledge, there won't be any HVAC added.
oh,
The existing space, we could occupy and use it now, but aesthetically, because of the broken windows, because of the lack of power, typically a wedding setup, just so that to share what the typical wedding setup is, there's no electronics used. It is a static display, static decor. So it's florals and the arch. So we would be doing something similar over there. But there's no electronics are used. We don't provide any music or video equipment. So we're looking at just modeling what we use now and having it at the other location. Specifics for operating costs, I'd have to ask my colleague here, but I think it would be minimal.
couple of,
Couple of lights, it's really. and
well, that's it. What about things like security monitoring and what?
Very minimal.
Yeah, okay.
Very. We had talked about possibly putting in a small fan force heater just to use on the shoulder seasons, chilly in the morning or something.
Yeah.
Again, it would only run based on use. So again, if there's nobody in the heat, what you did, but you talked about as an idea. Again, it would only run on a day if it was cold and somebody was gonna be in there. By no means would it run all the time. The light's the same, only on when people are in there.
So do your customers get charged for a wedding event?
Yep, so civil ceremony fees go through the fee bylaw. They go through the annual fee review with council every year. So currently a civil ceremony with tax included is $520.
$520, okay.
And that includes the room permit. That's a dedicated officiant. That includes the use of the decor. So we call it wedding ready. So literally people can just show up and be
Yes.
married.
Oh, okay.
And it's nice, they have the ability for photos and everything. And I think that's why it's been somewhat successful over the last few years, because we've kept our fees within the limits of what the other municipalities are doing.
So you don't have to read the bands 3 weeks in advance and.
No, there's no alcohol, no cannabis allowed, no dogs. We have people ask to bring their dogs in. And typically the weddings are less than like 10 or less. A civil ceremony appeals to somebody who essentially couples have been together and they just want to make it legal, or sometimes people have been together for a long time and one person is ill and they want to have that legal certificate so that they're protected. It's, even though I've been doing it for years, every wedding still seems to be unique because you're working with the energy of the couple. And I would we have had a couple large weddings, but a large wedding here would be like 35 to 60 people versus a large wedding in a traditional church or facility might be upwards of 300 to 350 people. I can tell you that I'm in regular contact with other municipalities that have offsite locations. So like East Gwillimbury, for example, uses the Sharon Temple. And they outsource some of the wedding activity. Newmarket, no staff do weddings there. The weddings are held in council chambers, but it's a contracted officiant that they use. Stouffville is mixed. Even in my area of Georgina, there's a handful of officiants that do on-site and off-site weddings. So it kind of varies from municipality to municipality, depending on what the community need is. The nice thing about Aurora being small and being centrally located is we will marry anyone. If you meet the requirements of the marriage license and you have the marriage license, you don't need to be a resident of Aurora to use our civil ceremony, like our program. So we benefit that way because I've had people come from Guelph, I've had people come from Toronto, because we tend to try to accommodate people as much as we can.
Do you advertise that it's available? You do?
Yeah, we have a local ad that you'll see on occasion in Aurora when there's space. We used to look at doing the wedding shows and stuff, but through the pandemic, those have they don't happen anymore. So we also have a postcard that we provide at the counter here in communications does the odd social media promotion and stuff, but the program, knock on wood, kind of runs itself. People looking for it, we're easy, we're searchable via Google.
Question to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Is the building, the Pet House, if it were not used for this purpose, is there another purpose or it's just sitting vacant? And that's the other alternative? Sorry, I wasn't here prior to this year, so maybe this was answered before.
Happy to. Right now, it is sitting vacant. It is a shell, like you could see some of the pictures. It's only used for storage or the odd event we might put in because occupancy is maxed out at 10 people. Based on the current function of the building. If we go, we maybe could get more in the building, but we'd have to use the washrooms. We'd have to add HVAC. So we keep them to a minimum. Could it be used for something else? I don't know if there'd be much demand with 10 max, maybe a meeting. But I can't see it. I mean, we'd be happy to make it available if that's an alternative, but that would be its limit. It's because of occupancy right now with only 10 and it's no washrooms on site, it would probably be very limiting for another purpose.
So it's really taking a building that would otherwise not be used and turning it into something useful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Pictures are very limiting, are very telling as well. It's small. I mean, the room is really not much bigger than this room. I mean, it looks much bigger outside and when you go in and there's a big post in the middle. So I mean, it's a little bit choppy too. So it's not a big giant space.
Yeah, I
It's a
just,
little bigger looking in, when you look at it outside, you go in and go, ooh, it's small.
well, and I think it's, what I wanted to understand was if it's being turned into something useful versus sitting there not being used for anything. So at least if it's turned into something useful, then people will be able to make use of its space and enjoy the fact that it's a heritage building and.
We have just, can I add? We have had.
Free flowing, go ahead.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. We have had interest in it and we have had, like, we've done, I think it was last year I did a ceremony on the trail system at the covered gazebo. So we have had interest to expand the wedding program outside of the council chambers. Because I know it's hard to believe, but not everyone wants to get married in council chambers aesthetically.
Yes.
And when I look at the wedding trends, like people are paying thousands of dollars to go and get married at a rustic barn. I've done a private wedding at the Bradford barn last summer. And like literally they're sitting on boards and I've attended a wedding where we sat on hay bales. So the whole rustic personalized, where they can kind of make it their own, has been trending for quite a while. And I think, we have the benefit of the Arboretum right there. A lot of my couples will go down with their photographer and walk down the path between the senior center and town hall, just around the corner there and take pictures and go down to the trailhead. So aesthetically, like I think it would do well, just location wise. And I know so I met some of you in 2018 when I came to the committee then, the parking impact and the impact with the washrooms would be minimal. I know there was concerns from the senior center. Parking is at a maximum all the time. But when we book when you book a civil ceremony, there is a consultation with your assigned officiant. And one of the things that we always advise them is that if the parking lot is full, there's additional parking at the back. There's also parking along the road. And typically, like even when I've done pictures and stuff with people on the trails, if they've wanted pictures ahead of time, we meet at the Access Aurora desk. That's kind of our meeting hub. And then we walk down together. So that's how I would address that. So that would just be a business practice that we would adopt. And we wouldn't be encouraging people to go into the senior center for washroom use because town hall would be available to them.
I just think from a historical significance perspective, knowing that that building is historically significant, is sitting vacant, can be used or repurposed for something that obviously there's a demand for. I mean, it's from a heritage perspective, it's an ideal use of a reiteration of a building's giving it purpose again, so.
Yeah, and giving it life again, right?
David?
Oh, I lost my train of thought. Through you, Mr. Chair, has the Pet House, this use, has the public or partners been consulted for potential alternative ideas for use in this process?
So quite some time ago, it would have been before Robin joined us. There was consultation with public and staff, and I recall that there was several ideas, but nothing was moved forward. There was ideas around a running group wanting it that used the trails. There was, I believe there was an idea for a tourism office. There was an idea for it to be extended programming for the senior center for additional space. The space, the way that we're proposing that it be used is because of the condition and the investment that the town would need to do in order to permit it out for a permitted group. So if somebody wanted to have a birthday party there, for example, it's not really feasible. If the Arboretum wanted to have their annual AGM there, it's not big enough. So things like that. So I'm not sure, David, where that process stopped, but that would have been through the planning department would have been through Carlson. With Carlson Tang was the heritage planner at the time. So there's been consultation, to the extent of consultation for it to be utilized as a wedding chapel. I'm not sure about that. And I don't know if the chair has any information around that. I think it was just something that, because the wedding chapel idea was in that original list of ideas, I believe. Because I think it may have even been before I was doing the weddings. Stephen Hike would have been the clerk at the time. So that's how far back it goes.
Continue through you, Mr. Chair. So if a citizen or member of a committee came forward with an alternative use, a presentation, so be it, that could bring the building to, I'll call it more Aurora prominence. To go back a little bit, anyone that doesn't know the history behind the Petch House. The Petch House sat on Leslie Street. We know the Petch House has a stronger history to Stouffville. It does have some value due to it being a historic building. I mean, the wood is pretty impressive when you're in the inside and look at the grain and everything. When I followed this, I mean, I kind of went, like I love history, but it was, again, if you go out to Woodbine and Aurora Road and you go to the Methodist Church, the Petch headstone, the size of a massive monument is in, in Stouffville. We know that history is there. Some information probably I'd say about 7 years ago now came to me and I was like absolutely floored. To protect my intellectual property, because I'm probably going to write a small book on this, so I'm not going to go into full detail, but I was shocked to find out some information regarding the Petch House that actually pulled the building into our history of Aurora. So I decided to investigate that. And I'm even more shocked now to find a story that connects the building to a much larger industry and a dispute over a product that went all the way beyond our borders to a World's Fair. This is all connecting back to the Petch House. So there's a much bigger story here, and I kind of feel now with that building and its location and its story that I honestly really do believe passionately it deserves a bigger position of prominence to be enjoyed. I believe that history and tourism matched together brings people to the community by selling a story. The story brings the people here, not the buildings, not telling the story, and then they look around. And I really think now we have a really, really huge story here, and I have evidence-based material to back it up. I even went to a service club recently to go into their archives in the 1800s to find out and go, oh my goodness, this is all true. So I just want to bring forward, when I brought up the knew this was coming. So seeing it was talked about being a wedding chapel, I'll leave it. I'm not going to touch it because the spine is so dainty. This is the Petch Bible. I acquired it I think 10 years ago, negotiating with someone from the United States. And they wanted just crazy number for it. And the negotiations went on for quite some time, but I don't want to move it, but in the very first page, it does, in one report, Adam has, makes reference to the family tree in this Bible, and yes, it is present. So, I guess rambling that on, would the council, I'm asking this council and staff be interested in an alternative use based on this new information? Because we didn't know it, years ago.
Can you, sorry, David, I'm following, but I'm not following. So can you clarify what the alternative use would be to have it as a hub,
It would be,
as a public as a?
it would be used as a public designation, a singular use that wouldn't be impeded by the 10 people. It would be asked to be put in a much larger position of prominence to fulfill the story that has to do with our, like I said, I don't want to give away too much of my. But again, there's a bigger story on the early history of products manufactured in our community. Much, much bigger. And I think it fits more into the area of, not far from our downtown core, bringing people in. I mean, I see a vision of Mosley and Wellington Street right now absolutely look epic in heritage restoration. And I think it's only gonna get better, and it's almost like we've, without designating, have a little heritage district there. I think that can be expanded into another area, a little bit north, through our trail system. And I think the pet shows could be a very, very prominent part of a much bigger story, I really do.
Okay. Any other comments from the committee?
I don't have questions of staff. Excuse me. But I do have a few comments. As David has mentioned, the pet shows used to sit on Leslie Street. 5 council terms ago, it was on Leslie Street. Every council, I think, since then has deliberated, to what extent, I'm not sure. What can we do with the pet shows? I think at the time, some developer lent $100,000 to have it moved.
Smart centers, I believe.
Smart Center.
That plaza area.
Not lent, gave.
Yeah,
Gave.
correct. They facilitated.
Yeah.
It was 80,000.
And would I be correct that I haven't finished, but with this question, I'm assuming that's all been spent.
To move it and put it together.
So the issue of what to do with the pet shows has been around for almost 20 years. I wish David was a little less secretive, but I understand. I have no problem using it for weddings. And perhaps there's room, since a wedding is not in there 8 hours a day, every day of the week for the year, it's in there maybe for 30 minutes once a week. Maybe there's some future availability to showcase whatever the secret is that will come in the future. Perhaps both can happen. My issue is I'm not so sure that these upgrades on this building to make it wedding worthy should come from the Heritage Fund. I'm not sure that and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just expressing comments since we don't have to come up with an agreed upon recommendation. So when I read this, my thought was, is changing the flooring, recognizing and preserving heritage aspects, is adding lighting. The cosmetic, to me, the Heritage Fund should be spent on recognizing and preserving heritage aspects of something. I know money's tight with council, so that comment, I'm assuming, will be ignored. But then I'm also concerned, well, what if we're going to put in the HVAC for 5 times that amount? Is that coming out of the Heritage Fund as well? I know that's not on the table right now, but if 50,000 can come out for upgrades, perhaps 250,000 can come up for upgrades because we're setting a precedent. The last line, no, not the last line, but last paragraph on page 8 of 29 says proposed improvements will enable the town to generate incremental operating revenue for the town. If the money does come out of the Heritage Fund for things that I'm not sure support heritage, perhaps some of that money will be returned to the Heritage Fund, or should be returned to the Heritage Fund. Anyhow, those are my comments.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Several years ago, this discussion kind of rose to the surface again. And at the time, the Aurora Historical Society was discussing whether the Pet House should be moved to their property at Yonge and Wellington, and used for whatever. But at the same time, there was a proposal put forward that the works area that was used by the town that moved to Industrial Parkway North be turned into a car park. Now, I know, David, few meetings ago, we spoke about roller skating in that area, but there was still room for the car park. So if one is thinking about, just imagine the Pet House is moved to the where Hillary House is, in the gardens there, because there's a couple of acres, and the car park is utilized at the back. That would give people a chance to park there, walk up to into the Pet House, or then go up to Hillary House if they wanted to. It was a vision that was bandied around several years ago, but since then it's kind of laid in dormancy. So.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the location that I'm talking about actually speaks to exactly what John's mentioning. It's putting a pet house in a place of prominence to enhance a bigger story. The Hillary House is including in that, our industry is including in that, our trail system is including in that. I believe that, again, it's, and I'm no engineer, but I know from what I've seen elsewhere, many of you know I've traveled around Ontario looking at what other smaller communities did with little to enhance a story. And I know that what I've seen in other communities, the Pet House and the use that I'm talking about would need basically portable air conditioning and what's put into it to make people want to go there. It's yeah, I just want to clarify that it's pretty much near the location that John's speaking about, near Hillary House. And I just think it can be a destination. And I do agree with Bob. I'm kind of wondering what the heritage connection is. It's great. I mean, it's sitting there not doing anything. This is a use. But I also wanted to ask too, my understanding is the Niagara College does wedding stuff. Do they do this type of, like, do they do wedding services there also? Or is that something you do and then they go over there? Or?
So through you, Mr. Chair. So the Armory and Niagara College has a micro wedding program that the town supports, but they have their own officiant. So it would be no different than if somebody does a wedding at the mansion or DiNardo's, the banquet hall in Aurora. Some folks may do a civil ceremony here and then choose to go to the Armory if they're gonna have a formal reception. We have had weddings, in, I'm trying to think, Town Park, where they have to permit the space, but currently the wedding program here is only in council chambers. Does that clarify, David?
So I'm still confused about you mentioned Genardo's. There's somewhat of a connection between the town of Aurora and the Armory, we know that. So to me, it kind of sounds like almost a little bit of duplication of services.
Well, they,
I'm
they
just-
don't-
I'm just gonna interrupt because we could go on for, and I like this, the discussion, but if we could, revolve it around heritage and our mission at this table, that would be great.
Mr. Chair, they're asking for money from the Heritage Fund. It is heritage, it's a use. Just wanted to say that, thank you.
Kevin, you have any? Or Counselor Weiss? Sorry, I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Thanks. I'm fine. Thanks so much.
Kevin?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to unmute there. I like it. I'm not familiar with the Fetch House. I haven't, this is my first term on the Heritage Committee here, but I really like the idea of finding a use for a building like that. And I think a wedding venue is an easy one. Hearing some of the comments, I like the idea of being able to hold an event that doesn't take up a lot of time, but allows the town to recoup some money. And just to throw it out there, I do consider, I do think it makes sense to spend some of the heritage money on this building, even though it's not necessarily to restore part of the building. But I think anything that would allow the heritage building to be used, certainly warrants use of some heritage funds. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
You, Mr. Chair, just quickly, I think that Bob's recommendation to create something in conjunction with the research that David has clearly done very thoroughly about the Fetch House. I think there's an opportunity to, pardon the pun, marry the two, and maybe bring them together so that there's a way of using the building now, because clearly there's a need and it's sitting vacant, which is unfortunate for a building of such historical significance to be left vacant and unused and unseen. And regardless of whether it's used only for weddings or if it evolves into something that's both used for weddings as well as to commemorate the important historical significance of it, it's still going to need a security system. It's still going to need electrical. And down the line may need bathrooms and may need HVAC, et cetera. So it seems like some of the recommendations are going to be needed now, regardless of what the property is used for. And I think we would all agree it's not nice to see heritage buildings in disrepair. So even if it's just a matter of changing windows or making it safe, I think regardless of what it gets used for long term, it's going to need those things. But I do think that creating maybe some sort of display or museum or recognition of its historical significance once that information becomes available would be a really lovely way of using it as a wedding venue, but also as a de facto museum for its historical significance. And I think people using the building would probably really enjoy seeing that information on the walls of the place where they are choosing to get married. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm
able just to add something. If the committee decides to support the use of the Fetch House for the wedding program, the way that I also kind of envision it is before each service, I do an introduction. And I would be coming back to Heritage Advisory Committee asking for input of what could be read before a wedding service. Because I've seen that done when I've attended other weddings. It's always nice when you're in a wedding officiant, you get to be a guest at a wedding, because I like to borrow and steal other people's ideas, like we should do that. And I think there's an opportunity that, you know, if we want to highlight a heritage building and we want to highlight Aurora and put it on the map, one of the ways we do that is through storytelling. And all of you are knowledge keepers, right? I'm a knowledge keeper here at the town. I've been here close to 15 years. So there's things that, you know, people will come to me because it's not written down anywhere. And so I think it's important to continue to share those stories. And I think it would be a really neat idea that before a service was conducted, people are welcomed and they're shared on what the space is, how it got there, information about the Petch family. David and I have shared, he's shared information with me over the years with my time here. And I think that, like, I think that's an opportunity to provide some exposure to the Petch House, even if we looked at even doing it as a pilot. You know, people thought I was crazy when I went to our solicitor to introduce a pandemic program, a pandemic wedding program. We were one of the only municipalities in the GTA, and we were busy because even during a world crisis like that, we saw we had to pivot, and we saw that there was a need that people still had to move forward with their lives. So I wanted to share that with you because I think through that and the resiliency that the town showed has helped elevate and boost the wedding program. There's still only myself and one other officiant active currently because we keep the numbers down. My role as manager of customer service and Access Aurora is weddings are just one of a little sliver of my role here in Aurora. So if you have questions after tonight, like I'm welcome to show you the setup on a Friday. You're welcome to attend if you want to sit in. Most people, we try to expose staff to the wedding program and people are able to sit in with permission of the couple. But I think it is an opportunity to continue the story of the Petch House and to have something formalized as part of the wedding script when we do them. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. Any other comments? I think the only thing kind of left hanging for me is, David, you brought something up, but if it's left where it is right now, it's not going anywhere. So I think the dilemma is to know more about the idea, or you got to figure out a way to communicate what your intent is in order to open up that door to have the possibility of maybe a dual purpose to facility. Otherwise, you know, that's not to say that we move forward with the wedding idea and something else can come along and maybe it's, you know, I always saw this in phases and we try this and maybe find some more money to do something else to make it more usable. But it's up to you. Leave it as it stands as an idea and move forward with this, depending on what council thinks.
The only way that, let's put it this way, I believe that this is so valuable that I'm gonna protect my intellectual property and make sure it's in print before I release it. I've spent a lot of time researching this story. Like I said, it's big enough for a book. If I let it go, I guarantee it's gonna travel like wildfire, and to me, it's useless. And I've put a lot of effort into this. I guess I can fast track and try to put something down on paper, but as of right now, I don't have anything that I could or would say, this is it, here we go. You know, I've spoke to John in the past about, you know, potentially something, like I said, to help enhance that area. Even at that time, I did not have the last pieces of information that I needed to fulfill the story. And like I said, it's a big story. If you're gonna tell the story, you tell it right. You don't want a bored audience. And now I have the, like I said, the story, and I just think it's a much bigger tourism. Not to disrespect the wedding chapel, I just think it deserves a place of, you know, rather than hidden behind the senior center. Now that I know this, before I wouldn't have said that, but I really do believe that, it could be a helper to the Hillary House. It could be helper to, our parks and trails. I mean, there was talk even before moving into Shepherd's Bush. I mean, you know, and I think there's potentially, once this is put down on paper, there's grant money. I think we could convince a lot of people to back it. So, but as of right now, I can't just put it out there.
Sure.
Apologies.
Yeah. I know it's not heritage related, but will there be issues in the summer not having an air conditioned space for weddings? Is that the prime time?
So the couples would be advised that there's no HVAC.
Would we revert to here?
I don't think so, because it's like if it was booked, it's permitted, right? And if they want that space, they want that space for a reason. When I consulted with the manager of building code, when we did the site visit previously, he said as long as the window's open, we would have enough airflow. Keep in mind too, that the scripts, we use 4 different scripts, and they range literally from 6 minutes to about 12 minutes. So your welcome, your introduction, your civil ceremony, signing of the paperwork and pictures, you're looking at half an hour max. My fastest wedding has been 4 minutes in council chambers, because council now has that lovely big red LED clock and they timed me. So we would disclose that at the time, because we also typically do a consultation. So right now, we've been doing virtual consultations, just sending out pictures of the council chambers, because a lot of people don't want to come in and do a site visit. So that would be something that we would disclose on the intake for the civil ceremony, that there's no air conditioning.
Okay.
And I'm also thinking ahead, like, you know, people would ask, are we allowed to bring in candles? Well, we're not gonna invite an open flame in a heritage building, right? Best practice would say no. So we already have kind of guidelines and rules around the civil ceremony in an application. And all of that's online, all of that is public.
Have we researched what it would cost for HVAC in just HVAC? Yeah.
So again, I think with the way the electrical's been roughed in, if we get power to it, we could probably put a fan or 2 in there too.
No, I'm thinking of
Yeah.
a split unit that does AC and heating on the wall with a unit outside. Those are very inexpensive, but yeah.
I figure open both doors and hope that there's a breeze.
Any other comments or
People are getting
questions?
married in barns, there's no air conditioning in barns.
No.
So it's not unusual.
Any other comments? I'm gonna use the mover and seconder for both items, and we'll just vote. We've amalgamated both, unless anyone has any questions on the second item specifically. Okay, see none, all those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. Thank you, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
That's right.
All right.
Okay, we are going to do what? Item 6, delegation. Christopher. Does he have it on the screen? Do you have a presentation or?
There is a presentation, yeah. Linda, it's okay if I just nod? I don't need the clicker thing? It doesn't matter.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So I guess I'm following the Petch House, which is a long discussion about a business that didn't really have a defined purpose. And I'm here tonight to talk with you about a business that's been here for 140 years. The building has more or less maintained a presence and a purpose singularly for over 100 years. And I kind of want to get our heads around the way it looks now doesn't really denote that. And is there something we can do to maybe get back there? So if we could. The 9 Wellington Street East is referred to as the Knowles Butcher Shop, and there's a good reason for it because effectively it was run by a singular family through 4 generations for almost 100 years. And this is the family, which I'm going to go through a couple individuals and some slides here. So William John Knowles is the W.J. Knowles that's emblazoned upon the front of the building for the time he was operating it. And he had a butcher shop on Yonge Street, moved it to this location when he was about 25 years old, and basically continued to run this thing. And it was quite a powerhouse business in our downtown core. So the family related was instrumental in bringing this building into fruition. So his father ran a brickyard on Kennedy, and his brother is quite a well-known builder, probably to this committee, for a bunch of houses in the town of the period. Now you might think it's a butcher shop. Well, what is there there? And it wasn't just a butcher shop. There was a lot of competition in town, but this butcher shop effectively made sure to stay with innovations to keep themselves different. And they didn't just service our town. They serviced quite a wide area through using delivery systems. So William John Knowles is the name on the building, but he's also not just effectively a man that's a businessman. This man spent quite a considerable time in politics. And what I've noted there is there's 30 years of service, never suffering a defeat in municipal contests, which I think is quite an accomplishment when you think of politics in this day and age. So just another a bit of context to this kind of person and his contributions. That's on top of 60 years in this business and was still working on his 84th birthday, which also is something you don't hear quite currently. In passing this along, so I'll try and get through these slides a little quicker, but you can always come back to this presentation. So this comes down the lineage here. So this goes to his son, John Reginald Knowles, and then on to George Douglas Knowles, which went by Douglas Knowles. And I made note here because it's the 100th year anniversary of the RCAF, that when Douglas came back, basically, he took over the business in 1946, continued to run it for another 30 years before it finally fell out of the Knowles family name. In that, can we just go back one slide? It might be hard to see in this, but in that picture there is a bugle. So that's the bugle basically blown by the effectively the delivery cart person. There's a whole bunch of photos there. And I've asked, because it mentions in that article that those were donated. Those items, unfortunately, the location isn't known at this point, but it is kind of an interesting piece pertaining to this business. So after 1976, you can see the business completely gets changed in the way that the front of the building looks. And you start seeing awnings go onto things, different uses. The next one. And then, of course, we get to whatever this is, about 4 years ago, and we all know of the fire that basically took this building through, I guess it was through a renovation project on the roof, kind of a quick incident for this building. Now, I guess there were some assumptions really early on that fire was going to cause some kind of irreparable damage to the building, and that was not the case, because as you can see, this building and this owner has done exactly what they needed to do to bring this building back. And I don't believe that was at a cost to the town. This is a good business owner doing what he needs to bring back this heritage asset. So when you look at this building, the reason I'm for this committee is it's in your sheets for your register and your review of this. And what I try to do out of this blue sheet, which is quite dense, is pick the points that effectively are denoted against the building, which now when you look at them in context of some of the history that I've provided, seem to be a little askew. The top one, though, is the primary one I want the committee to consider is the conditions listed as poor, and some of the attribute parts under the poor are things like brickwork and paint that draw down the perception of the value of the building. So the building currently, as you're seeing it in here, it's even getting painted by local artists. You can see at the top part, there is a section there. The paint hasn't been reapplied or made to look kind of the way it was before the fire. It's just left to be this kind of weird building, unfortunately not befitting or kind of just speaking of its history. The only reference you get when you go by this building is that wooden original heritage plaque, and that really doesn't provide a lot of detail. So when I was going through some notes, it was interesting that there was a reference made to the fact of the original sign on the building, that I wonder if it's still there. And if you zoom in on some photos after the fire, you can see where the fire and the heat started peeling up this, the bit of the paint that's on top of the sign. Go to the next one. So what I'm proposing is that an effort be made to contact the business owner. And because there's such a natural delineation between the top part of the building, which is just residential and has nothing to it, and the downtown or the downstairs part, which is street side, which has the business signage, that the actual signage for W.J. Knowles Butcher come back to the building. And it won't present any contrast between the two or confusion that we have a heritage component being recognized in the building. So in doing so, there is a couple, well, there's quite a few, but there's a couple local outfits that do this regularly, and they work in the Toronto area. I contacted one, and I just tried to get an estimation of costs so that the committee could understand what that is. And we're definitely looking at something at about under $10,000 to accomplish this, which would include even some of the cleaning, I understand, to the outside of the thing, or potentially some base painting. So that gives you an idea of what an effort like this would cost. And I'm here before you to kind of draw upon the funding source that was previously mentioned for the Patch House. So it's interesting that you had a presentation before you for the Patch House looking for $50,000, and it was for things like electrical and lights and broken glass and fire alarms, which sound to me to be things that should be covered in a capital funding source for a building, not for a heritage aspect. And when you read through the heritage, the bylaw in place for the heritage fund, you notice it's for special programs, projects, and initiatives. So I'm hopeful that tonight, in what I'm presenting to you, is I'm not coming to you as the owner of this building. I don't have any contact or affiliation or have spoken to the owner of this building. So I'm not looking at this as a way for the owner to benefit from this work. But what I was trying to do is go, you guys can look after the heritage aspect where the business owner can use the other tools the town has provided. There's a CIP program that that business owner can apply to if he wants to upgrade his own awning or do other pieces at the lower level. What I'm saying is it's more appropriate to draw upon this fund to bring back the piece that is, town heritage that again isn't part of the current operating business. And effectively, you've got some options here. I mean, nothing has really been done, unfortunately, after we've had the fire and everybody's, oh my goodness, we're going to lose this, significant building. And if it's significant, it needs attention. If this business owner is happy running the business part, then it probably falls upon the community to help go through the other process. So I'm just looking at it to see if it's a project of the committee, if they would be amenable to this so that it can proceed to council, get council's input, and see if they can refer to staff and see if staff can work with this owner and see if something like this can move forward. Because I look at this as a really high return on investment for providing a high impact piece and doing some high visual restoration in a downtown area, which we're supposed to be revitalizing. We're supposed to be improving. And I don't see a lot of that in large scale, in your face things where a small effort like this can provide it. So happy to answer any questions.
Cynthia?
Me, Mr. Chair, so
Can I just get I'm moving in a second there, just to put her on the floor. Cynthia, Bob, go ahead.
So I keep thinking of this phrase that I use a lot in my regular work, that is low cost, high impact. And I think that's what something like this allows. And I remember when that fire happened, it was devastating. And you're absolutely right. If it's such a significant building, that it needs to be treated as though it's significant. And I think in keeping with our desire as a group to elevate the profile of historically significant buildings and people, et cetera. I think this allows that. I'm really interested in the evaluation sort of point form that you extracted from that document. I'm assuming this is using the policy from the provincial government.
If you want to pull that slide, I'm sorry, the only
It's,
way I can do that is it's that page, I think.
This one here.
Yeah, 2022, I think, if you
Yeah.
look at the bottom corner, yeah.
So what's interesting to me is, obviously, some of these metrics are not necessarily in keeping with what we consider to be accurate or relevant, but this idea of reflect work or ideas of a person significant to the community, it says no. And I think we've heard this several times tonight that people are interested in history because of the story element to it. And I don't think that is correct. I don't think the answer is no, because I think the reason why it says no is because from a macroscopic level, maybe, Knowles did not have this significant impact on Canada as a whole. But if we look at it from a microscopic perspective of local history, which is what our mandate is, clearly the answer to that is yes. So I think obviously there's going to be money involved with having to restore something like that, but the impact of it, I think, is great. And it looks very unkept the way it is right now. So if there's no intention to demolish the building, which I hope there isn't, then I think it has to be maintained and at least allowed to be represented as what it was intended to be in conjunction with what it probably is as a business.
Sorry, do you mind?
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can perhaps add a bit of context into that 2022 evaluation sheet that was undertaken by the Heritage Consultants at that time through that Heritage Register review. And fortunately, some of the positive actions that were taken by staff as well as this committee through what I'll call as like that next batch of designations. So as this committee knows, 30 designations were pursued last year, 2023. And then fortunately, when staff and the Heritage Committee were scanning, it was June of 2023, June of our term together, we selected this property, irrespective of that evaluation sheet, to be one to be pursued for designation this year as part of that quote unquote next batch. So that being said, as part of the designations that are ongoing, council has requested that staff do consult with these owners on the designation process before issuing the notice of intention to designate. So that is currently actively happening, where we are reaching out to the owners, the letters are being sent. This owner we have not yet heard from, but it will be a matter of getting their consulting with them on designation and then trying to designate that property. The actual formal issuance of the notice of intention to designate, staff will be reporting back on the results of the consultation, and then council can choose to issue the notice of intention to designate from that point. So I want to provide that context, recognizing that evaluation sheet, that was done by a consultant, that isn't necessarily staff's opinion or the Heritage Committee's opinion. And this is a property that staff and the committee did select out of that review as saying, hey, wait a second, this one should or does meet the criteria.
Oh, that's great to hear, because oftentimes those questions are so limiting that it doesn't acknowledge the significance of those individuals to the local community. It's just sort of a very, arbitrary designation. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Thank you. John?
Yes, question. When this building burned and was saved, were there any insurance implications here at all covering damage? That they could be used, that insurance money, to bring it back to its original splendor?
If you're asking me, I can't provide that. I'm not the owner.
Okay,
Right,
just
I mean, that
wondered.
might be something that you want to follow up with staff on.
Yeah,
I'm
through Mr.
not here
Chair.
to represent the owners.
Through Mr. Chair, I too do not have that essentially private information of the owner. But from a general, not necessarily specific to this property, the insurance would likely be about repairing to a habitable state,
Okay,
generally
but
speaking.
nothing to do with the facade.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I do not believe the facade was impacted by that fire. I do
Oh,
believe there's the
okay.
second story mostly internal, so to speak. So it would have been essentially bare bones insurance coverage to make
Yeah.
it back to that habitable, operable state.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I love the presentation. This building is probably one of the ones that touches my heart biggest of all. The very first walking tour I designed, I met somebody on Larmont Street who was related to the Phillip brothers. And they shared a story with me that back in the day, he would go to the downtown core area, around Yonge and Wellington. And you did two things. You went and paid your bill at the butcher shop and you listened to some music at the corner, usually played by Mr. Lawaska and his accordion or something. And what touched me was, he told me the number of times that residents, especially during the Depression time period, would go in there and they never had a bill. And that just blew me away, that not only was this guy prominent in the community, but he was caring for the community in troubling times. That's a story we really need to tell, and that's worthy of that name being up there and connecting that Knowles name to people's hearts. That's how you get people into a community. You should pull them in by the heart.
Oh,
Couple of things. I brought pictures in addition to the one that Chris had on his slide, just to show the building. You can't see much on this one, but you can definitely see the signage here. And so it's this building here. You can see with the old car.
Oh, that's all right. Thanks for the noise.
So I'd like to thank Chris for his presentation.
This is one.
Right there.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that some of what Chris has presented might help you in discussions with
Correct.
the owner and or council, just to add depth to the significance. And Cynthia stole a whole lot of words from me.
Sorry.
Just in terms of disagreeing with the evaluation from the consultants and reading that W.J. Knowles was former councillor, Reeve, mayor, let alone the butcher shop. I would not want this to come across that the Heritage Fund is available to any business in Aurora to enhance their building. But I don't quite see it that way. I see it more as preserving and restoring a piece of Aurora's history. And I think that's worthy of the Heritage Fund. Let alone, okay, we'll do it for buildings that have fires. Even aside from that. So,
Oh, when were these photographs taken?
I'm guessing probably, I don't, the back of the card something. Yeah, yeah. 1900 to 1910 in that neighborhood, but if you know cars better, you might know better too.
I think the Model T was around 1922.
There you go.
Councillor Weiss, did you?
Yeah, thanks. I'll be happy to chime in. I want to thank Chris for the presentation because it fills in a lot of blanks. I lived very close to that at 21 Wellington when I first came here, and I used the business when it was Caldwell's, and I was really unaware of the architectural significance of it and the value of the community. So I'm all for the preservation of this, and I want to thank Adam for sending the list out to me, because I went around every one of those in my ward where that you had a list, and of course I realized nobody was at that place when I dropped by, and it wouldn't be the owner anyway. So I'm certainly in favor of this, and how it gets funded is really a matter of how we fund anything, whether it comes from Heritage or comes from somewhere else. But I think it's certainly a useful thing to do, and I'm all in favor of making sure this gets preserved. Thanks.
If I may,
Yeah,
exactly.
suggest we proceed.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair. So obviously there's a couple of things on the table, being that designation is actively or currently being pursued and consulted upon with the owner. I want to mostly pose this as a question, I suppose, in that designation, and again, if council chooses to pass that or issue that notice of intention to designate, likely would materialize by the fallish timeline. And is that an avenue to then approach the owner saying, as a designated property, here's this opportunity as well? Because just speaking truthfully, I don't necessarily want to bombard the owner with, hey, let's designate and can we also have your consent for this restoration work? That's certainly an option. I'm just mostly brainstorming around that concept, knowing that there's actively designation being pursued right now.
Mr. Chair, I just want to add that I do know the owner. And there has been quite a bit of activity around with the facades in the downtown, especially in the east side to fix some, of the brick and painting especially. So I do applaud the owner for a lot of those buildings.
Yeah.
It's expensive. I talked to so many people recently in that stretch along Wellington Street East and Mosley Street, many of the owners. And they have said it can be tough.
Yeah.
To keep a heritage building looking fresh. And I commend them for that. I mean, they should be really applauded. And I do wish we had some help for them in that, as I said earlier. I mean, that's the area if people are gonna come into our town, go to the train station, arrive by train, or come off one of the 400 highways,
Right.
they're gonna come into that area.
Yeah.
And it should be, it's paint. It's amazing what you can do with paint.
Absolutely.
Right?
And through you, Mr. Chair, again, sorry, Bob. The only other thing I may suggest, or as we work through this too, is in those conversations with the owner, perhaps inviting them to the committee or having more one-on-one staff level council or whatever it may be, but also framing it as it's more than just restoring the sign element. Maybe it is more of an overall facade treatment, right? I don't know. Again, maybe that enlarges the scope slightly, but that's something that could be explored as well as more of a pitch, right?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of that awning that's there right now really is not consistent with the design.
The
of the
dental?
building. Yeah, so that they might be open to that conversation if it enhances the
Right.
facade of the entire building rather than having it sort of, because right now it's sort of disjointed, right? Like there's the upper area, which is where the paint would be redone, and then the lower area where the business is. So maybe instead of treating it as two separate facades, making it a little bit more uniform, and maybe
Right.
they'd be more amenable to that once the heritage designation is given.
Absolutely.
No, but it would look so much nicer if the whole facade could get.
Yes. Yeah.
I understand what you said in terms of we don't want to overload the owner with too many requests, but I kind of took it differently, maybe with a smile, that if you allow us to designate, we'll give you some paint to do blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
I think it would be helpful if he could, like, I printed out Chris's presentation just for the owner to whiz through and see,
Correct.
holy smokes, this is the building I own?
Hmm.
Absolutely. So through you, Mr. Chair, that crossed my mind as well. And I think that's good to direct to the public materials, absolutely.
Mm.
But technically, we don't have council direction to allocate the 10K or whatever it may be to the project. Like that commitment isn't necessarily there yet. So we just need to be clear on that divide.
Yeah.
But I agree that as we approach on designation, it's public material to say, hey, this idea is available, right? So I think that's something that staff can work on now. And certainly as those conversations materialize and information comes available, the next key milestone, so to speak, will be a report to council in terms of the results of consultation. And based on this information as well, I think there will be a line item or some more details as to, number one, the conversations had with the owner, then also recognizing that this property in particular, sort of, not to say one property is meeting the criteria more than other, but this clearly does have some merit as part of that downtown core based on Ontario Regulation 906 and the criteria at hand.
Good.
So, Linda, help me out, because, we can't do motions, but we can't give direction. So this conversation will be captured in the minutes. To what extent? So that either myself or Councillor Weiss can piggyback off of that to move it along.
I think there's probably general consensus from the committee in supporting this proposal, so that will be reflected
In the minutes, okay.
in staff, of course.
Right, and staff already has direction to consult on designation. This is available now, so I think the two can kind of bridge together, and then as it formalizes, further action can be taken. Right? On the designation and then on the actual contracting, so to speak, of this work.
just similar to the last time I was here, I basically presented and then there was a little bit of a pause and I took the last one to council. I'm happy to do that again. So if it helps kind of cross that loop of not knowing which meeting, like I'm happy to take this, condense it down for council, appear there and just kind of reinforce things. But I just wanted to be more cognizant and get Adam's feedback as to kind of where he was kind of saying the staff side was going to be, so that if I do this, and then you kind of refer to staff, maybe there's a better gap of time and there's some more time for staff to kind of have some concrete answers to come back. So it'd just be helpful for you to know when they need to jump back in. I'm happy to do this.
Yeah, that's a good point, because at least give you some time to
For sure.
reflect on
Yeah.
which direction to go, whether it's, it sounds like the committee would like to move right away, but
Absolutely.
there's, you know,
Yeah.
staff that's advising just to put some thought towards
Right.
the appropriate way to address this with the owner.
Absolutely.
Which comes first.
Yeah.
We both together.
So I can certainly answer that, and not to be in a roundabout way, but quite frankly, I think the property probably should be designated if you're also going to do this work to it. Right. And certainly that's up to the committee and council, but that is just sort of where we were at in the process. Designation right now, should a bylaw be passed, that likely, like we're in the middle, right? So that likely would formalize through the process of issuing the notice, going through the Ontario Heritage Act timelines. It would culminate likely by the fall timeline where a designation bylaw is passed and registered on title, should that happen. And I don't want to necessarily wait that long. Again, goes back to the premise that it probably likely should be designated if we are going to do this work.
I liked it better when we didn't have to talk to the owner about designating.
Right. But again, I will reiterate too, that there is enough information here that I think less formally, so to speak, and part of this consultation, this could be made aware, right, as an opportunity. We'll pitch it as an opportunity.
So,
Any,
so where does that leave Chris, whether he presents to council or not and when?
Right. So I would say once a designation bylaw is passed, but that's just my own general opinion on sort of the sequence of events at hand here. I certainly leave it up to you if I respect all opinions though.
leave it at that. Any other comments? So it's just a motion to receive. There, okay. All those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Eight, information items. We have no information items, new business.
There was,
Any new business?
There's
sorry,
Yeah, one-
Did I miss one?
Laura Boulevard,
Forest Street, we did.
Oh, we did that.
That man right there. Yeah.
7.4.
Oh, that was the.
Yeah.
Ah, okay, sorry, my apologies, 7.4. Memorandum from Manager Policy Planning and Heritage Redevelopment Application 16/2022 Laura Boulevard. May I have a mover and a seconder? Put the item on the floor for discussion. Cynthia, David, Adam, do you wanna?
Yeah, absolutely. Through you, Mr. Chair. This is an application that the Heritage Committee has seen before. It is the development proposal adjacent to the Aurora War Memorial and Peace Park. It's come back for, or it was presented to the Heritage Committee initially for comments. We also had a Heritage Impact Assessment prepared that showed that there would be no heritage impacts to the cenotaph as a result of the proposal. And based on the integration of some of the Heritage Advisory Committee's comments regarding for there to be no access between two properties, for a fence to be installed and for proper landscaping to be provided. This specific report or memo coming back today is in regards to the request for specific conceptual renderings to be provided. So you will see specifically in the attachments, the developer has been able to create conceptual renderings that showcase the proposed development relative to the cenotaph and the Peace Park in particular. I think a big consideration, even from a staff level review, was height, where the proposed development is supposed to be half the height of the cenotaph, and there won't be a visual intrusion on the cenotaph and its presence. And it's an opportunity for any further comments from the Heritage Committee as a result of that ongoing application.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm looking at the rendering on my PDF, it's page 51, the very last one.
Yes.
I like that it sort of looks like it's embracing the cenotaph, like there's sort of a circular feeling, it's being protected by the trees and the landscaping.
Right.
But it's not overpowering. I think it's going to be largely dependent on what kinds of trees are used. Because obviously this picture is clearly not during the winter.
Yep.
I wonder if during the winter time, if those deciduous trees, if those are deciduous trees and they're lost their leaves, that barrier is going to be quite different. So I wonder if that's been considered.
That's a fair question. I think one thing you will see on, I believe it's attachment 1, is the actual real world conditions of the site. And thankfully the Peace Park has bountiful landscaping present.
Yeah.
I think it's a fair comment where the actual shared boundary and the required landscaping on the developer's property itself can have more evergreens or coniferous landscaping there. I think that's fair, and that's something we can build in for sure.
Yeah, I think it would just allow it to maintain that boundary that clearly is what people are hoping for, so that the development doesn't interfere with the importance or the the serenity required for that space.
Absolutely.
Any comments? None? All those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. Now we go to informational items. We have no information items, new business. Anyone have any new business?
Go ahead, and then I want to update people on our last meeting.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could ask, Adam, if he could share with the, committee, the, blocking system and the music theme this year. To get
Yeah.
everybody in the loop.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. So through you, Mr. Chair, I've been made aware that the Provincial Ontario Heritage Trust plaquing, which is those, we may have seen them before, those sort of typical blue plaques from the province and administered through the Ontario Heritage Trust. They receive quite a number of applications every year from municipalities across the province. So they tend to focus on themes for each year, so they can sort of scope their applications and say tailor their plaques to a certain particular theme. That theme for this year is music. And maybe that's a segue for you, David.
Okay, there we go. That was easy.
Yeah.
So on that note, there is one particular building that I think should be approached for this blue plaque, and I think it would look absolutely stunning, especially considering Gridfest is now reliving history. The Aurora Community Center has always been known as a music venue, or as a sports venue primarily, and it had Oktoberfest and wrestling and everything. But one of the things that's incredibly forgotten and how much of an impact it made on our community and music in general, the music scene, is the number of iconic bands that starting back in, even in when it first opened in '67. I mean, I told so many young people in this town and shared it DJing at the farmer's market, Rush playing in the small auditorium when they were teenagers, to then play the larger arena. Bands like Lighthouse, April Wine, Max Webster with Kim Mitchell, Blue Peter, Chilliwack, Guess Who? These are names that we know, who a lot of them, many of them, got their footing in us having a smaller venue, the auditorium, and a larger arena that could hold about 4,000 people. So I really believe this, we should move forward to have the ACC recognized as being a very historic music venue to iconic Canadian acts in their early days. I will say that one last story, I met a gentleman by the name of Bob Bennell, who was ill living at the Chartwell residence on Mill Street, Rest Haven. And somebody told me he played in a band, and they were, the name I was given was Deja Vu. And it was funny, when I did the songbook event at the community center, did a dance with all Canadian content, we had a song called Be Happy on the playlist.
Mhm.
And somebody told me, a guy from Deja Vu, it lives at Rest Haven. I went, you gotta be kidding me. So I went and met him. Unfortunately, he was in declining health. And one day, just weeks before he died, he says, David, Rush opened for us at the Aurora Community Center. And I'm like, Deja Vu never played the community center. He said, no, I was in a band called Manchild. And I was absolutely floored. So, I mean, it just goes to show you that there's a lot of music stories in our town that, again, sometimes they're slipping on telling our history, our heritage. I think this is an opportunity to start showcasing our, that we helped launch some careers in a way, you know?
So through Mr. Chair, I think it's a good idea. The blue plaque application form is open to anyone. So it can be yourself, it can be me if you want to consult with me, or we set up a meeting and we go through that. I'm cool with that. Or any other suggestions the committee requires. I'm not sure what the application form requires up front. Like, I don't think they need wording for the plaque per se. I think it's more general, but anyone, it's open to the public. Anyone can do that. So we can certainly coordinate.
There is a fee for those plaques.
For the initial application, once you're approved.
Once you're approved,
Yes,
then you have to-
correct.
Yeah,
Yes,
there's a
yes.
fee in kind or something.
Correct. Yes, correct. But I think for the initial stages, yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Right.
Yeah.
So you guys can coordinate?
Absolutely.
And if I can have one of the things on that note, before on a music theme, I just wanted to thank, because he's on the meeting, you might remember I did the presentation regarding the concept of a music museum. And since then, I want to thank Councillor Weiss, who brought something to my attention, which was the Helix program with Seneca College, which I'm now involved in that program, taking some courses, and hopefully it's going to lead to mentoring. And May 1st, I have to do a Dragon's Den style proposal to a very large team of obviously influential people. And it looks like there's some great interest that this is going to potentially get some footing. So again, I just want to thank Councillor Weiss for jumping in and recommending that, because it was powerful.
So that's actually a beautiful segue, because I was at Helix not long ago. I work with a gentleman by the name of Lucas Chang, and he's involved heavily with Helix and Chris Dudley. And I was talking to him about our project.
Yeah.
About the history project. So that's a very interesting intersection. So I've spoken to the Pathways consultant at the York Catholic Board. I've reached out to the one at the York Public Board. I've also, in speaking with Lucas Chang, he's going to connect me with St. Andrews College and St. Anne's. And he's very interested in being a part of the project. So Lucas Chang is part of an organization, his company called Y2 Labs. They're an entrepreneurship training program for young people. I'm going to speak some edu jargon now, so please, if you have questions, let me know, because sometimes I slip into that world. The ministry has a program called Specialist High Skills Majors, or SHISMs is their abbreviation. Their focus through the Ministry of Education is to offer sector-specific training for young people in secondary. There are different sectors. So for example, arts and culture, health and wellness, technology, construction management, etc. One of the mandates of the SHISM program is that the students get these reach ahead opportunities, and all of it is free of charge. So they don't have to pay for anything. One of the things that they get is called ICE training. ICE training is exactly what David was talking about, this sort of Dragon's Den approach to them. It's problem-based learning. So they're given a challenge and they have to come up with a solution. They're mentored through industry professionals, and then they pitch their solution with real life feedback to come up with a product or an idea that is viable. So I actually think this is a beautiful opportunity for that kind of training to be added to this program. And I think there's a way of liaising with the SHISM program for this project. So in light of all of that, what I would like to ask is, and I'm thinking this might be a question for you, Adam, but I'm not sure. I'm wondering if there's somebody at the town that I could work with in relation to creating some material, like publicity material, so that we can advertise this project and create some, maybe a flyer or a poster or some sort of information, so that when I'm speaking to people, because everybody has said, please give us some information so we can circulate it. That should not be something that I develop myself. I'm sure the town has branding. So I think having the town branding on that is important. So I'd like to talk about what that might look like. If you're not the person, then hopefully you can put me in touch with whoever that person might be.
Right.
And then Bob did give some really great feedback on the structure of the task, as it were. So that I would really appreciate that. But I can tell you that the word on the street is that people are very, very interested and they're desperate for places for co-op students. So if we can offer that type of opportunity, there would be a lot of interest. And as I was sitting here this evening, I was actually thinking that as part of our pilot, Hutch House and Knowles Butcher could be two of those properties, because there's already so much research on the butcher shop. And obviously David's got so much information about Hutch House, maybe that those could be two of the 10 or so properties that we start with.
Yeah.
So.
So through Mr. Chair, I can speak to sort of the staff resourcing level. Like, I think it may at this point be best just to say directly from the Heritage Committee.
Okay.
Because, quite frankly, we don't have a capital project or anything to be using corporate comm or anything
Okay.
on some of these materials. So I don't mind helping too, where I can, of course. But in terms of it coming from the committee, I think we need to be clear that it is the Heritage Committee's
Of
efforts, right? So,
But through the town of Aurora, right? Because I would want to.
the
be able to
Aurora's
say
Heritage
this is-
Committee.
Yes. okay.
Yeah, you are part of the town of Aurora Heritage Advisory.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know if that kind of answers your
No,
question.
it does. It just, it makes it easier because.
Of course, yeah. I'll still look into it and see if there's some leeway. so
Yeah,
to
I would just
speak,
want to
but
make
yeah.
sure that in terms of like logos or.
Yes, I'll double
terminology or
check.
Things like that, that
Yeah.
it's all consistent and accurate.
Absolutely.
And I think launching for September is viable, and that information, I will be getting that out to people, certainly before the end of the school year. But there's interest and quite a bit of interest. And I just did have a question in relation to some of the opportunities that I think it would be great if we could offer the students. And this is a question, so for example, if I wanted to bring somebody like Chris Dudley at Helix or Lucas Chang from Y2 Labs on board, is there money available for us to be able to pay them for their services, or is this completely
Yeah,
expected to be done pro bono?
yeah, again, this, through Mr. Chair, there is no capital project for this. I think when we were envisioning and brainstorming this, it was supposed to be kind of that volunteerism
Yeah, it's
effort.
just so that I know.
Yeah,
what
exactly.
I'm doing. That's
Yeah,
all.
absolutely. No,
Yeah,
that's fair.
yeah, no problem. Perfect. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Any other new business? No.
We got it, 25 to 9.
All right. Could I have a motion to adjourn? John? Cynthia? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.